Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm Kimberly D'Souza. Now we're doing things a bit differently this evening in that joining me is Independent Senator Paul Richards. Mr. Richards is joining us in his capacity as a member of the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Senator Richards, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and may I take the opportunity to congratulate you on all your great work.
Thank you. Now, before we get into national security issues, I wanted you to share exactly what is the role of an independent senator. And given our current political climate, is it a challenge to sit on the independent bench?
Well, the role of the independent senator is to sit as one of the senators appointed by the president, Her Excellency in this case, and to add balance to the discussion. As you know, the Senate is comprised of the government bench, the opposition bench of 6 members, and 9 members of the independent bench who are supposed to be taken from various spheres of life, professionals who have made their impact in one way or another, who can bring balance to the discussion in between the 2 main parties, as it were, in our construct. So I think the bench is very important in adding that balance and adding a sort of sobering voice to the discussion on any particular issue. And is it a challenge? No, not really, because to me, I can't speak for my 8 other colleagues, it is really advocating on behalf of the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So you put aside any partisan politics because you're not supposed to be a part of that, but of course you bring what your experience lends and also what you think is in the interest of the people in a particular bill or motion.
Now, crime is a very hot button topic as of right now. We've heard the long-term, short-term, medium goals. But in your capacity as an independent senator, even as an average citizen, what do you think should be the primary focus to deal with that issue right now?
Well, to say primary focus may be not as productive as saying what will work in the short, medium, and long term, because crime is so multifaceted, particularly where we are in Trinidad and Tobago now. We're seeing all different types of criminal activities intensified. Of course, many of us focus on the murder rate, which is not necessarily the only barometer for what the level of criminal activity is in the country. But it is disturbing when recently we've crossed 500. But you have to ask the question, would it be better at 300, 200, 400? Any murder is one murder too much, but of course there's greater interest or concern when it crosses a benchmark, a macabre benchmark like 500. I think it has to be approached in different ways and from different angles. One, in terms of the supply side, which is unfortunately persons who become engaged in criminal activity, and we see it happening in some instances from a very young age. 2, the drugs and the illegal guns part of it, the police interdiction, the police suppression of crime, identification of crime and solving of crime, and of course, the judiciary part of it, the going through due process and the judicial process. So it's not a one-dimensional challenge for the country. I think one of the things we really need to focus on, as I have in the past 7 years that I've had the honor to sit in the parliament, is looking at the young people and ensuring that they do not come too vulnerable. We have groups that are falling through cracks in education, falling through cracks in social services, falling through cracks in socialization in their families, in their communities. And they, because of those shortcomings or gaps in society, they are more vulnerable to the criminal element. So you find, I had the honor, I think you were part of it, to go into the prisons a couple of years ago and speak to some lifers in maximum security prison. And I think we interviewed 17 people who were sentenced to life in prison for murder. And if we spoke to 17 of them, 15 of them didn't finish secondary school. So it tells you a lot. The others were, in their opinions, abandoned by their parents or had really difficult relationships with their parents or caregivers. So you start to see trends in how young people feel left out or failed by society, and so end up in criminal activity or end up in gangs committing criminal acts. On the other side of it is whether or not over the years, and this is not laying blame to any particular commissioner or any particular leadership in the police service, you have to ask yourself how effective our police service is in identifying crime, detection rates, solvency rates, and the impact that is having on criminals feeling a sense of impunity. So, and then we have a very, very, very slow criminal justice system in terms of persons sitting 15, 16 years on remand, awaiting trial. In some instances, if they had been processed, they would have served their time long before they're waiting on remand. So it is a very complex issue. Unfortunately, we get caught up in blame game in Trinidad and Tobago, as opposed to coming together and finding solutions or sustainable solutions.
Yeah, I'm glad you give us a range of options, because I think people just label it as socioeconomic problems, not knowing that there's more to go along with it. But one of the things you mentioned would have been the legal firearms or the illegal firearms that's on the market right now and being used to commit these crimes. Now, you would have been a member at a recent meeting where this was discussed. And I'm wondering if some of the suggestions that were brought forward, do you think that they are the right ones to deal with this issue right now?
Well, there are two things. One, there's a recent conversation by the Minister of National Security where he indicated in the Senate that 108 legal firearms have been found to be involved in criminal acts. Now, I think that's a drop in the bucket when you think that the SSA, the Strategic Services Agency, has indicated, I think, in a report 2 or 3 years ago, that there are over 12,000 illegal guns in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that's a vast understatement because that was years ago. And we have heard utterances from the Minister of National Security and the Acting Commissioner of Police and the past Commissioner of Police that we have a problem with a multitude of illegal guns coming into the country. That is the real problem. And added to that, to exacerbate the situation, when you look at the type of weapons coming in and the preponderance of those semi-automatic weapons that are used in some instances in war scenes, and the millions and millions, in the words of the National Security Minister, of rounds of ammunition coming into the country in a largely unregulated scenario that asks the question, what are these kinds of weapons coming into the country for, and why can't we get a handle on that illegal gun stream into the country, which is at the foot of, I understand, 87% of the murders being committed. So while it is productive to look at the legal gun issue and, in the words of the Minister of National Security, the negligence of the owners of legally issued firearms, the real issue really needs to be the continued focus on the illegal firearms stream into the country and also the persons using them, because a gun can't shoot itself. Are we doing enough? Are we succeeding enough in taking the gang members off the streets? And the answer probably is no.
Yeah. One of the excuses we often hear as well is that we have illegal guns coming in through legal ports of entry. For example, there have been complaints that the scanners at customs isn't working. Do you think that is one of the reasons we have this flooding of illegal firearms on the market?
Well, the Minister of National Security clarified that at the GSC recently, where I asked a question about that, the report that he championed when he was chair of the National Security GSC, where we visited the Port of Spain, Point Lisas, and the airport, that there were several recommendations made. He clarified that when further information came to him, it was not necessarily those ports, but secondary ports or bonded areas that were the areas through which the illegal guns were coming in. My question to that is, okay, we know that. That has been identified. What are we doing about it? Have we heard about anybody in recent times being detained, arrested, and charged for illegal importation of weapons? Your answer is as good as mine. Yeah. And given the number of illegal weapons we hear are coming into the country, what is our track record on, one, identifying the illegal stem, seizing them, and also bringing the persons who are committing those illegal acts of importation to justice? Yeah. Again, those kinds of glaring gaps in our success rate have to be identified and examined more closely.
Senator Richards, we would have seen the incident at the Rose Hill Primary School. Share with us your views on this.
From the information that's come to us, even before the unfortunate incident where the video went viral of students, the teacher being commendably proactive and hearing the gunshots and exercising a drill that had been practiced, because I had the privilege to interview the new head of tutor, who said that it is not the first time that the students have heard gunshots in that area. And the teacher exercised a drill that had been practiced because they've experienced gunshots before. So while it is disturbing, the video we saw, it is not the first time the drill had been carried out. It's just the first time it's been caught on video and went viral for the national community. So I think the response is really a response to a viral video and not the problem. Because the real problem is not the video. The video just showed us the problem in a graphic way. The issue is the gangs and the illegal guns. And not only in that area, because the president of Tutor also intonated that there are other areas that experience similar circumstances and students are anxious. You can't learn in that environment. The teachers have to go into those areas to teach the students, the administrators, the principals, and also the parents have to go collect their children in that sort of environment. So while I understand the response of the state in shutting down the school and putting the joint police army patrols to maintain law and order at that level, that is just part of the solution in an immediate sense. The real issue is, why has it allowed to be carried out for so long? And what is the solution? The solution is to get the persons who are firing illegal guns or fighting in the streets as gangs.
So the issue is not, or the solution is not to relocate the school, because some people have been saying that the students should be relocated.
And then what happens if the gang members go to that area where the school is located? Mm-hmm. And what happens to the other schools that are subject to hearing gunshots and have to go through sometimes violent circumstances to get to school? Are we going to relocate all students if they hear gunshots? That can't be the answer. I understand it may be a short-term answer because you have a clear evidence of a present threat to someone's life, particularly children. But that can't be the overall answer. That is an answer to an immediate situation that is clearly graphic and disturbing, and the students would have been traumatized, and by extension, the national community that viewed the video. But that is not the medium to long-term answer. The medium to long-term answer is bringing the perpetrators to justice.
Now, I want to get a bit personal, and I hope you will allow me.
Absolutely.
So I know that we're now coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the height of the pandemic, we would have seen increased cases of domestic violence, increased reports of domestic violence. You would have stood up and said that you witnessed your mother going through this as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, based on your experience and knowing that your mother was a victim and a survivor of domestic violence, what sort of advice do you have for women or men or anybody who are experiencing that type of violent situation in their homes?
Well, let me take it from two angles. One, the survivor, or in some instances, the victim, because some women are killed. So they're victims. The victims didn't survive in those instances. Some people are very strong and they've survived domestic violence and have gone on to receive counseling and live productive lives. And in some instances, be advocates against domestic violence. But I think understanding what domestic violence is, for a long time, we thought domestic violence was physical alone. When there are clear signs that someone may have a tendency to be abusive, controlling. It's really about a power dynamic where the person who feels, in most cases, has the physical upper hand in a relationship or the financial upper hand in a relationship, subjugates someone or brings them down so that they can control them, because it's about power and control. And for example, that really tragic case that was in the recent media where I think the young woman left the person and went to her mother's house, and he sought her out and killed her.
And killed himself.
Yeah, and killed himself. And on the other hand, we have to ask ourselves, are we socializing men in the way that they understand that women are not their property and women are not to be controlled by them, and dialogue and a different kind of approach to, because all relationships have friction and have challenges, but is the way that we're socializing our boys and men ending up in a way that they are able to resolve their issues without getting violent or without getting abusive. So there's that side of it, because there's a reason why some men respond that way and some men don't respond that way to conflict in a relationship. And then there's some think about the way we need to also continue to teach women to identify the signs of domestic violence, have more state agency support in terms of giving women safe havens, which I know exists and has been working well, so that women who feel that they are under threat or that this man may have a tendency to lash out and hurt them or harm them and their children have a safe space that they can go.
Do you think more can be done to protect all genders against gender-based violence? We do have the gender-based violence unit, but as it relates to the law and parliament, do you think more laws need to be developed to protect people against that?
I think, we always kind of default to more laws as opposed to the enforcement of the present laws. Laws will always, society changes, so laws will always need to evolve. But I think the present laws are quite robust. I think maybe one or two of them could be tweaked when we see scenarios develop that we didn't predict before. For example, to me, laws that deal with cyberspace, where there's a lot of bullying going on in the youth demographic, but also there's a lot of abuse happening online that the laws presently don't capture at the level that they should. And a lot of predatory behavior is taking place. But I think it's more about the enforcement or the consistent enforcement of the present laws and having avenues for people who feel they're under threat to have access to some sort of protection, and also continued education and advocacy.
Yeah. Now, while we do have laws against the gender-based violence, I know that the LGBTQIA plus community, they have also been advocating for their own laws to protect how they feel and their sexuality and their gender. Do you see this as being important, as being on the legislative agenda, especially in this current parliamentary session?
Well, I can't speak to the current parliamentary session. That's entirely the remit of the government. But I can say that the LGBTQ rights is a human right. It's whether or not someone is gay or straight or bisexual or whatever, is a human being, and every life is valuable. So I don't see it as different from protecting women from domestic violence or protecting children from predatory behavior. So people like to get quite emotional about whether it's a moral issue or an ethical issue, but it's about protecting human life. So I think, to answer your question directly, yes, it is urgent if people are being hurt or harmed or threatened or killed. And I think it's a human rights issue.
Now, we often hear people urge politicians to stop playing politics with crime. Is this a view you also share?
Well, I don't know what they mean by that. I think, depending on the political lens you view any particular issue through, including crime, people have their perspective based on, in very many instances, where their political allegiances lie and who they support. But there is also a vast cadre of the society that views crime as a serious issue and not through a political lens. So while I understand the statement, I think the level of criminality we're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, and quite frankly, across the world, but we live here, so it's immediate to us, has people anxious, has people fearful, and I think what people want in a practical sense is to get a sense that the authorities are making progress and that they feel safe. It's not an easy thing to worry about your loved one when they leave home in the morning. We have come now to put up cages around ourselves, live in gated communities. Women can't walk the streets. You have to wonder if your wife or your girlfriend or your daughter is out after dark, if they're going to come home safe. Carjackings, and of course, the barometer of murders. So I think what people want, politics aside or partisan politics aside, is to feel safe in their own country. You want to feel safe, and you want to feel that you can live your life and pursue your dreams and raise your children in a safe environment. And I think that is the primary issue people have. They don't feel safe, and in many instances, they don't get a sense that we're heading in the right direction in terms of managing crime in the country. So one can look at that through a political lens, but I think we all share the same feeling of insecurity, and we don't feel safe.
You've been an independent senator since 2015, and one of the things you've advocated strongly for is prison reform. You've been to the prison system, you've seen some of the ills of the prisoners, but you've also highlighted some of the wrong things that go on behind bars. Speak some more to that.
Well, I wish everyone could take a tour of the prisons. And there is a knee-jerk reaction because of the same criminality we spoke about for people to believe because you have been charged, you are guilty. And that's not our judicial system. You have been charged and you are on remand. As a matter of fact, the largest percentage of the prison population are on remand. I think it's about 3,000, 3,500. And imagine for a second if that were your family member being charged. Now, granted, it takes a particular level of evidence to be charged. So you found yourself in a really difficult position legally, but that doesn't mean you should be held in less than humane conditions. And what I saw was less than humane conditions. And think about somebody being in those conditions, awaiting trial for 5, 10, 15 years under those circumstances. Do you think that is going to lead to any rehabilitation? Do you think that person, and more than 90% of persons who are incarcerated, including those who are convicted, are at one time going to come back out? Do you want that person coming back out a rehabilitated person, a reformed person, or do you want them coming back out angry at the system and willing to do more damage? The answer is clear. And the conditions under which most of the remandees are held is less than optimal. And to me, that is the real tragedy here. Because from the time someone is detained, arrested, and charged, I think even while they're awaiting trial, there's an opportunity for reformation and rehabilitation to start. You can start trying to change that person's mind. And in some instances, they will be exonerated. And in some instances, they will be convicted. But in either case, do you want that person to spend 10 years behind bars under really atrocious conditions and come back out more angry? Or do you want them to be reformed and be a productive member of society? The answer is clear. You want them to be reformed. You want the process from incarceration to eventual release, whether you're exonerated or convicted, to be rehabilitative and part of a really comprehensive and sustainable restorative justice system. And that is not what's happening now.
Now, Senator Richards, your background is in media. And so I wanted to get your thoughts in the role that media plays in the fight against crime.
Oh, that's a multiplicity of roles. One, education and advocacy, in terms of, we spoke a while ago about domestic violence, running PSAs, educating women and men and boys and girls about effective conflict resolution, stuff like that. Also producing, like TTT, producing shows like 12 and Under that engages young people in positive activity, helping them to realize their potential. In terms of news media, investigative journalism, bringing corruption to light. That is fighting crime. I think one of the things I kind of lament is, and I know some media houses are doing it, is adding more balance to good news and positive stories out there. I think we kind of toward, the old maximum media, if it bleeds, it leads, so it's front page. But I think in very many jurisdictions, I see effective media coverage balanced against more positive stories. Dylan Carter, 9 medals, should be emblazoned across the front page, because the constant negative on the front pages of the newspapers and online has a psychological effect on the population. It has a profound psychological effect, and we need a respite from it. So it's very important to me, while not sanitizing the news, that's not what I'm suggesting, adding some emphasis on productive and positive news in the country, because there is positive news in the country. And there is news that can uplift the society in a real sense. But when you constantly have a stream and a diet of bad news and negativity and 430 murders and 500 murders alone, constantly, it has a deleterious effect on society. And I think we could do a little better as media in championing some of the positives of Trinidad and Tobago. Because remember, it's not localized, it's global now. So it's how we look at ourselves and how we want to present ourselves. Without, as I said, I'm not suggesting editorialize to sanitize what's happening in the country, but there are good things also happening in the country that we need to focus on more. I will say that journalism is part of our constitution, and I think we have had a very professional media sector in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a very intense media sector. I think we have over 30 radio stations, 3 free-to-air television stations, a lot of online stations, 3 major print outlets, and I think the media by and large, does a really impressive job of covering the news in Trinidad and Tobago and making sure that the population is kept informed and championing transparency and accountability to public officials, etc. So I don't think we have an issue of media houses being silent. I think, of course, all politicians at some time or another, or most politicians, let me not be too superlative, sometimes end up in battles with the media which are not productive, but the media is doing their job. The media is not supposed to be public relations for politicians or governments or political parties. The media is there to be an independent arbiter in many cases of the truth, accuracy, and information that is the right of the population. It is a right because a well-informed population is a better population, a more productive and progressive population that leads to better and more sustainable development. So,
Senator Richards, final thoughts.
Well, thank you for having me. I think we have a beautiful country that has a lot of challenges. I think that we need to sometimes look at our glass half full instead of constantly very often half empty. And I know it's a difficult time, but it's not a difficult time for Trinidad and Tobago. I think we have a lot to be thankful for in Trinidad and Tobago that we don't focus on a lot. And I think that young people need to be empowered because that's the only way we'll have a future in this country.
Well, Senator Richards, always a pleasure to have you here. I know it's the first time on Delving Deeper, and I hope we can have you back sometime again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Join us at the same time next week for another edition of Delving Deeper. I am Kimberly D'Souza, and on behalf of our entire crew, have a good night.